Hi everyone, my name is Irina and this is the first interview from the series Inclusive by Design, where we'll invite top specialists from the digital industry and also members of underrepresented communities to have a conversation about inclusive design and accessibility. Today, my first guest is JF Hector Labram, who is Principal Front-End Engineer at Koof. JF works with both engineering and design teams to create accessible digital products. Today, we're going to pick his brain about inclusive design and discuss the following questions. The difference between implementing accessibility from the start versus late in the process. Also, best ways to include accessibility in the everyday product development process. And what's the best way for designers to test accessibility? Hi, JF. Thank you so much for joining me today. Could you tell me a little bit about yourself? I know that your current role is related to making digital products accessible. I'd love to understand how your role fits between design and engineering.
Hi, Irina. Thanks very much. Yes, of course. It was a bit of an interesting journey. It took me a while to find what it is that I really cared about. So at the moment, my kind of official title is Principal Front-End Engineer at a company that makes basically a website and a digital service that helps mostly kind of teenagers get counseling online. So I'm part of the engineering team and I don't use design software. I only, especially I spend half my time coding and half of my time doing things that help everyone. Like I call that more kind of, I don't know, everything else but coding, but I don't do like design in a design software. I do think a lot about interaction design. I do some interaction design code. I do have lots of conversations reviewing designs. But to give you a concrete answer, typically, if we have, say, a feature that we know we need to design, so I'm going to skip the steps where we're trying to come up with the right ideas and do the right research and stuff. We have a feature, we know it's very needed and we want to design it. So I fit in at a few different stages. One of them is that, so every design that's being prepared, I'm going to review it to check that there is no accessibility issues in those designs. And I'm going to do that before developers do anything with it. So there's that kind of, I check all of them before they are deemed to be ready for engineering. And that's really interesting. That's by far the most valuable thing I can do. Because if we get that wrong, everything else will be really hard to course correct. So sometimes there are a few changes to make to those designs. I look at part of my role is also to kind of own the design system that we've been building. So my feedback and my thoughts are not just about whether it's inclusive, but also, okay, how does that sit with the design system? Are we using the colors that we use consistently somewhere else? And if not, should we change them everywhere? How do you keep a small and tight, very streamlined design system in code and that matches what we have in a design? So that, I want that by the time a developer sees a ticket that they have to build with a mock-up, it has no accessibility issue in the design, and everything they're asked to do will do really well for design system, so that it's much easier to continue to do things in a way that's usable and accessible.
Okay, so it's already embedded in the system and the design system itself is accessible. Okay, and how do you work with engineering teams?
Well, so the way I work with engineers is typically once that story isn't ready for engineering or just before, I will look at it and sometimes I want to write down accessibility guidance. So sometimes I just write it, in a guidelines that are written somewhere else, or in a document that's pre-written, I just send them a link. Sometimes I write it on the ticket. Sometimes I don't write it because I think it's simple enough and I hope just people will know it already. I also do training with everyone.
Okay, and what do you think is the best way to embed complex accessibility rules into everyday design process?
The trick is this, is that wherever you are, go and learn them. Literally. Get help, or if you need, don't you, for some bits are a bit technical. Actually, by the way, the technical bits, They are daunting, but they're actually not difficult. It's just simple HTML and simple CSS. And most of it is not technical anyway. But my point is this. The big secret for me is this. It all becomes way easier once at least one person on the team who knows about accessibility. That could be anyone. It doesn't matter. It could be a designer, it could be a researcher, it could be a product manager, it doesn't matter. And so if you are, I mean, I don't know you personally, I know, but if someone who is listening to this is thinking, what can I do? What could my team do? Literally take a course. And there are lots of really good courses. I've actually have a page on GitHub that recommends learning resources. I'll share it with you after if you don't mind sharing with everyone. But just take any of them. There are lots of great courses. And once you know more, automatically people around you will care for it more as well. And it'll also become a lot easier for them. And they'll be doing some learning as well. So don't wait for the team or the organization to be ready. Just go and learn something as much as you can, even as little as you can. That's the trick. This has really solved my job is a bit meaningless. I'm not sure what I get up for. It's not interesting and it's a bit meaningless. That's completely solved that for me completely. I get up in the morning and I know it's incredibly meaningful. Like if you know those accessibility guidelines, then suddenly you can have a huge impact on people, on the huge positive impact in inclusive design and in accessibility. And also you become a leader around you. People really want to know how to do those things. And you'll be able to influence better outcomes. And it's so interesting. I mean, I find it so beautiful how, now that I understand it really deeply, how broad the web, a web interface is a medium like we never had before. Like you recreate web content, web page or web user interface, and different people consume that in widely different ways. And if we design and encode it well, that's all fine. That's just what browsers do. Now, the fact that we do mock-ups holds us back a little bit, because that's still like we do mock-ups as if we're designing flyers or advertising. So you need to also go beyond that and think, I know exactly, you need to know essentially how different people use the web differently, and what sort of assistive features and assistive technologies people use. And it just makes your job so much more interesting.
Right. And I know that for many companies approaching accessibility, it might seem like a daunting task. It's a big shift, big change for their teams. Where do you think they can start?
If you have employees, or the people who are actually making design decisions, or the designers, the developers, the product managers, the directors of companies, stakeholders, if all these people have power in making those decisions, but they also have privileges in sense that maybe most of them are neurotypical and most of them don't have impairments, then that leads us to a place where you're very likely to for those people to make decisions that will exclude other people who are not like them, because it's just automatic. The number one thing really is to make sure that the workplace and the work practices do not exclude people who are neurodivergent or who have impairments. So that, I mean, for many reasons, that's a legal requirement to start with, but it also helps you have a more diverse workforce. And in doing that, you get smarter and you stop making decisions that completely unnecessarily exclude people. So that'd be one thing. On top of this, there's this idea of designing with people who are not like you. So again, if a bunch of people are mostly, young, good sight, and I don't know, all mouse users, and design and make decisions, they get it wrong, and it'll work well for people like them, but not for people who happen to not be like them, or in situations that are different from, someone in an office with a very good broadband and those things. So that's where we have the idea of designing with someone who's different from you, or someone in different situation from you, as opposed to designing for them. And that's one of the key ideas of inclusive design. And so the way you do that is, again, hire consultants who use web interfaces differently than you do. Or if you can't do that, then make sure that you do inclusive you research and usability testing very often.
And do you and your team follow any particular guidelines? Do you create your own?
We've been talking about accessibility so much now, and I need to be very clear with people what it is that I mean when I say we need to make sure that we are accessible. And so basically I tell people what I mean is very, very specific. What I mean is that we're meeting, so I mean really three things. One thing is that we're meeting the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, level AA at minimum, in everything that we design and build. And I also mean two other things, and there's a lot of overlap, but just clarifies things for people a little bit. I also mean the second thing, the second commitment is that we are very careful at every stage to not unnecessarily exclude people. And so that means that when we design, even if something is not covered in the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, we'll be very careful to think about it and to improve that and to do as best we can. And same when we develop. And the third thing that means is that the websites and the interfaces that we develop are compatible, work well with the assistive technologies that operating systems and web browsers already have, like screen readers, page zoom, and voice input and that sort of things. Broadly, though, following the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines and associated web practices, associated best practices that achieves all of that. So we use the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines a lot. And that said, I mean, they're great, the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. I really recommend for anyone to read them, but they are definitely not beginner friendly. They can be very, very daunting, and they mix kind of thoughts and language about UX and thoughts and language about technical implementation in HTML and CSS. And that can be really daunting. Like if you're a designer and your job is to design for every single platform, like iOS and Android and the web, you might not know CSS or HTML. So how do you even understand the accessibility guidelines for the web? And if you're a developer, you unless that's your interest, you might think that all these accessibility or usability things is not your job. So the way I've come, essentially, I saw an opportunity of really understanding those guidelines so that I could help everyone else. And I also wrote a simplified kind of plain language version of it that I send around to my colleagues all the time.
Do you mind if I will attach the link to this video?
Yeah, I love feedback from anyone. It's very useful already, and I'm sure it's got a few imperfections. I didn't invent them, and I didn't start from scratch. I started from the work that the Government Digital Service had done, and the BBC had done, and a few other places had done. That's all available on an open source license, and took that and solved some of the issues, because none of these were perfect.
Right, and what do you think is the difference between fixing accessibility versus implementing it from the start?
So just before I answer it, behind this, there's something that we need to reframe for everyone. A lot of people think that accessibility is about adding features for people with impairments. Or that it's maybe not about adding features, but it's about making things accessible. It's about improving the accessibility of something, and it can be done, and believe that it can be done at a later time, i.e. you can do the MVP, and then you can improve the accessibility. If you do this, you're just not going to manage, because it's just not how it works. So accessibility is there are a few exceptions, but mostly it is absolutely not a separate feature or something that can be done later. It's actually a set of considerations that designers need to think about as they design, and developers need to think about as they develop, and QA, quality assurance, whoever does the quality assurance, needs to think about as they do the quality assurance. It's not icing on a cake. It's more like eggs in a cake. Like you can put them in as you bake the cake, and then it's easy to make the cake, and the cake is done efficiently and it tastes good. But the egg, you can't leave it for later. You can't try to add the egg after the cake is already baked. It's going to taste awful. It's going to be really hard to put in, and you're going to have a horrible time doing it. So it's a set of considerations that need to be baked into what you design and code right from the beginning and throughout. And if you do this, you're going to have an easy time. If you don't do this, you're going to have a very, very expensive time and painful, and the result is not going to be good. The trick here is that so to answer your question more directly now, essentially, if you don't know nothing, if you and your team know nothing about accessibility, and you're going to struggle at the beginning, and it's going to take you much longer. But once you know a reasonable amount, it takes some time to learn. But once you know a reasonable amount, then doing things following these inclusive practices maybe take you 5% or 10% extra time versus just not caring about it. So it's not significant. That's if you already have a reasonable amount of knowledge, and also if you do these, if you are proactive about these considerations of inclusion as you develop and as you code. That's if you're proactive about them. However, if you're not proactive about them, if you just, oh, the accessibility is going to be done later, we don't have time to do an inclusive design review now, we don't have time to fix that issue, the accessibility issue in the designs now, we'll just worry about it later, we'll do an audit later. So the stats for this say that it takes 40 to 100 times more times to fix an issue that you've introduced in the design or in the code versus doing it on the spot. Of course, that stat is very wide, and I have a source for it. Actually, that stat doesn't come just for accessibility issues; it comes for bugs in general. And it really depends, obviously. There are some things where it's not quite true. There are a few, it's a very small minority of things. It's quite easy to fix them later. But most of the time, yeah, it is a huge difference. I'll give you a concrete example because that can sound surprising. Like, so when you develop a user interface, say you want to do a questionnaire in a carousel on a web page. So we have one like this on the website. It's been built 2 years ago, and we try and make it better because it's awful for accessibility. Honestly, it is hard. It is hard to make it inclusive. I've asked the team to spend time, and everyone was daunted to do it. And when they do it, we struggle, really struggle. Why? Well, the design in the first place just should not, like, if you had considered inclusion, or if the designer at that stage had knew how to not unnecessarily exclude people, they would not have designed it like this at all. So later on, it means changing design and hence rebuilding things. But also, just at a technical level, the way you write front-end code for the web is you write the HTML, and then the CSS is like a layer on top of the HTML, and then this JavaScript will be a layer on top of all of that. If you realize that the UI is wrong, you need to change all this. I've already said this. But just even if the design is perfect, but the implementation was wrong, then changing the HTML will mean that you'll break a lot of CSS and break a lot of JavaScript. So that's why it's also important to basically be really informed and careful and avoid things as you design them, as you code them. And if you do that, honestly, you have a nice time with it. It's not a problem. It's only if you leave it for later that it takes a lot of time. It's what we call accessibility remediation that has a reputation of being expensive and painful, and no one wants to do it. But you don't have to do it that way. You can do it inclusively from the beginning.
Right. And what do you think is the best way for designers to test accessibility of what they've created? Is there any prototyping tools that they can use to test, for example, for screen readers and assistive technology, or do they have to learn code?
So first, I'd like to answer kind of what can, in terms of usability tests, what accessibility issues can we spot at what level of prototyping? So there are lots of things that you can spot just by doing a mock-up and doing usability testing based on that mock-up. You can check, things like contrast, readability, whether it's easy to understand, maybe even page structure. So you can essentially you want to test those things as early as possible, and you can do that on the mockup. And then as a designer, maybe you want to do a more interactive prototype with whatever tool you use to do simple interactive prototypes. And then again, you can test a little bit more. You can test whether people notice the interactive elements and people understand the structure of something. And that's a good second step. But then it's only when you have something that's functional and coded to the right standards that you can check all the other accessibility issues. To do that last bit, you'd need to learn to code. And no, it will not be enough to use a prototyping tool. Maybe, or there's maybe one that would be enough, but to use that one, you need to code. You need to code in the same way the front-end developers do. But there's a lot you can do already with a static mockup or with an interactive mockup. But you can't check for everything. So that's why it is so useful to be really informed about what are the known best practices, known mistakes that designers typically make, and to be careful. So essentially, the policy that I tend to encourage is, if you're going to be, is to say to designers and product managers and everyone, look, you can take risk if you're going to do rigorous, inclusive usability testing in the next couple of weeks. Then if you're going to do that, then yes, feel free, to invent a new interaction. If you're not going to do that, don't take the risk. You will not notice if you fail, and it will impact people who are not as privileged as you. So it's about, what I find is useful is to really study the design systems of companies and organizations who have done a lot of accessibility testing. So the Government Digital Service design system or the BBC Global Experience Language, studying them a lot, and it's really helpful. And I tend to use these patterns again. It doesn't look very innovative, but they're like this for a reason. And so that's what I encourage, yeah.
Yeah. And you already mentioned color contrast and readability of the text, but is there any other top design mistakes that come to your mind?
I mean, there are lots. Essentially, these guidelines are a long list of mistakes to avoid. Each of them is simple and easy to avoid once you know about it. It's a long list of mistakes to avoid. Oh yeah, keyboard. So a lot of people don't use a mouse. A lot of people use the keyboard to interact with the user interface. So typically the way they do that is press the tab key on the keyboard sequentially, and that in turn will reach all the interactive elements on the page. And once you've reached one, that could be a link, could be a button, it could be, I don't know, a text input, then you can press enter to activate it, or space sometimes. Now, so first you need to make sure that your website is entirely, you can do everything just by using the keyboard, just test it. And the other thing is, in what order should these interactive elements be selected when people press the tab key sequentially? In what order should that be? Now, if you don't tell developers, it's very likely that it will not be a natural order. So you really, really, really need to tell developers, and also check that it's implemented right, because a lot of people make mistakes, and a lot of developers don't, use practices that mean that it's a mess, and they might not know. You need to tell them. So that's another biggie, and there are lots of other small things like that.
Right, and would you document it at the visual design stage or wireframing, or make it a part of the final design documentation?
So some people do that. At Slack they do, at the BBC they do. Sometimes people call these blue lines. So they have mock-ups, and then they have the same mock-up with accessibility annotations, and that would include the alt text. It would include the role of every element. Is this a button? Is this a link? Is this, I don't know, is this a tab? And it also includes the order of elements, and we call that sometimes the tab stops. So you could do it like that, and yeah, that'd be best. Sometimes it's efficient if you work closely with developers, and if you have a culture that cares about accessibility, it's enough to sometimes just talk about it and make it a very clear if you're able with everyone to make a clear commitment that whatever will be designed, developed will meet the web content accessibility guidelines, then you can just say focus order needs to be natural and predictable, following natural reading order, and then as design you need to check whether that's been implemented well, and because otherwise you don't know. And so that in all cases is enough. Like if something doesn't follow natural reading order, it'll be fixed. It won't be released.
Right, and we know that the latest version of accessibility guidelines is currently in development. What do you think is the best way to keep up to date and be in touch with all the changes that's happening in this field?
So the first thing is the web content accessibility guidelines actually move very slowly. So the version 2.0 was released 10 years ago, and the version 2.1 was released in 2008. And the version 2.2 is really interesting, actually. You could see the early previews about 6 months ago. Now you can see it in full. It's open for consultation. It'll probably become kind of official in a year time, and it'll probably take another, I don't know, year or two before it's embedded in the law. So you have time to learn about them if they don't change. They will change at some point. They're thinking about the version 3.0, which will hopefully be a lot easier to use and be structured quite differently. But that's like very early work in progress. That said, the content would still be the same. Maybe the way you measure whether something is a success or a failure will be different, but the content, the best practices will still pretty much be the same. So learn what you have today, and that will help. That is essentially this best practices evolve slowly. So that bit is not very hard. What's hard about it is to kind of know where to start to learn all those things before you found the right communities and the right resources. But again, I've created a list of recommended learning resources that I'll share with you just after this. But if you want to just stay up to date with the latest things, so most of the people on Twitter I follow talk about accessibility, or there is a really good newsletter called Accessibility Weekly, which is very, very good. And actually, that's probably the easiest way to just stay on top of things. And there's also a really good Slack community called web-accessibility a11y.slack.com. It's on the list that I'm going to share. And there are lots of people ask questions, lots of experts answer questions, and you have all the knowledge you want there.
JF, thank you so much for joining me today and sharing your experiences and insights. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much. I'm really enjoyed doing this.
And thank you everyone for joining our conversation today. Please go ahead and check out JF Hector Labram and let us know if you have any questions. JF or I will respond to you. And also go ahead and check out our socials and reach out if you would like to learn more about accessibility or inclusive design. And I will see you here next time.